So next Monday is going to be a historic event, that astronomical event that happened 2017, I guess 7 years ago, and it's not expected to happen for another 20 years until 2044, and it's a total eclipse of the sun. And there's a lot of excitement. People are uh, paying attention to the weather reports minute by minute because clouds will interfere, and it's something that definitely excites astronomers. NASA is getting a lot of attention these days, and there's also the there's also a lot of enthusiasm from the average person. You don't get to see this all that often. You see pictures. There's all that talk about don't look and the special glasses. I know that number of institutions, a lot of schools. I've even heard of shuls, synagogues that are having trips to upstate New York and Syracuse in that area because there's this strip of the country that will be able to see the maximum effect of this. And so it's something that's very much in the news. If any of you will be attending, I hope you enjoy. Um, and there's just a lot of enthusiasm about it. And as you see, source number one from USA Today a couple of weeks ago. The sky is filled with breathtaking wonders, but one occurring on April 8th is causing people to plan trips in droves, prompting fears of snarled highways. Actually, I heard on the news today, the people up in upstate New York say you'll be stuck in hours long of gridlock traffic. So, to me, that says, that's definitely an inducement to come. The total solar eclipse on April 8th is causing such a stir because the rare event where the shadow of the moon will plunge a narrow strip of land into darkness in the middle of the day is an astronomical experience like no other that will be unusually accessible to millions of people. April's total solar eclipse will fall over more places in the U.S. than the total eclipse before and after it. And the broad length of the path of totality, right? That's what they're calling it, the totality. The path of totality is where it's going to be totally dark, where Americans have the best shot of getting a clear view, is much wider than it was for the eclipse in 2017, according to National Aeronautics and Space Administration. A total solar eclipse is also far more impressive than a lunar or an annular solar eclipse. During an annular eclipse of the moon covers the sun, believes an outside ring, some call a ring of fire, and it darkens the sky instead of plunging the earth into a night-like darkness, which is what happens during a total solar eclipse. A lunar eclipse, the appearance of a red moon, happens when the moon passes into the Earth's shadow, according to NASA. This year's total solar eclipse is expected to cause emotional reactions. A study of the social effects after an eclipse shows people who view the 2017 eclipse in its path of totality experience feeling like part of a collective more than those who are outside the path. Researchers found that astronomical events may play a vital collective function by arousing awe and social tendencies that orient individuals towards their collectives. Okay, so there can be an emotional connection. You can imagine, if you're in the zone of totality and it gets very dark when it's supposed to be light, there can be a lot of disorientation. You can be afraid. You can want to, therefore, cling to find some sort of assistance and the like. But it's an exciting event that doesn't happen very often. It's something that clearly is getting a lot of attention, as it should. Now, what I'd like to take a look at is some of the, spiritual reactions and some of the religious reactions, biblical, maybe other faiths. Also, the idea of, how does this fit into our, understanding of nature? Also, remember, we are a people that says blessings on thunder and lightning and rainbows. We have an appreciation for natural phenomena, and recognizing and noting that as an extension or expression of God's creation. And how has this been viewed? So if there are any, first, any comments or reactions to the article, otherwise we'll dive into some of the biblical sources that seem to talk about, when nature changes and how that is meant to impact us. Anybody traveling upstate New York next week? Oh, yes, maybe. Okay. So I think, many of us, and I'm here looking outside my window, it's a little bit gray and dreary. Many of us have, and it doesn't have to be eclipse when all of a sudden it gets very, very dark, cloudy, stormy, etc. But so we can imagine when these changes take place in the phenomena around us that it can be disconcerting or disorienting, especially if it's unexpected. We also, have a sense of within the Jewish tradition, spiritual tradition in general, but I'm most familiar with the Jewish spiritual tradition. This idea of light represents positivity, darkness represents negativity. We talk about, God, as we say every morning, that Yotzer or Uvore Choshech, God makes light and darkness. It's an extension of being based on a verse that Yotzer or Choshech Oseh Shalom Uvore, and we say as Hakol, God creates everything. Initially, the verse upon which his blessing is based on said Yotzer or Choshech Oseh Shalom Uvore es Hara. The idea that God creates the negativity. So you're talking about light and positivity, and darkness and negativity is something that we encounter. So there are a selection of biblical verses which talk about the darkness and being invoked by the prophets. So source number 2 from the prophet Isaiah: the stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. All right, these are expressions of darkness that are often associated with warning the Jewish people towards proper behavior. The idea that in a perfect world, nature continues and the stars and the sun give their light, the moon gives its light, and if that doesn't happen, there's some type of a break in nature. The prophet Ezekiel 32:7, source number 3. When I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. Here, it's also this idea that as a warning that when you will be punished, you will encounter darkness. A number of verses in the book of Yoel, one of the 12 minor prophets, lesser known. The earth shakes, the sky trembles, the sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Right? The change in the anticipated or expected natural phenomena is coming before the great and dreadful day. Yom Gadol v'Norah. Norah translated as dreadful, awesome, powerful. There's a certain eschatological inference that comes from the changing of the natural order. The sun and the moon will be darkened and the stars no longer shine. So it's focusing on that type of idea of the sun being dark. Amos, and on that day declares the sovereign God, I will make the sun set at noon. I will darken the earth on a sunny day. Right? That seems to very powerfully invoke this idea of an eclipse, right in the middle of the day, the sun gets dark. And if you look back into some of the articles, especially trying to trace the chronology, of when these prophets were living, in particular the Amos prophet, there does seem to be, within one of the battles against the Jewish nation, that there was the verses seem to indicate that there was this darkness that befell the enemy of the Jewish nation, and it seems to be approximately within the time frame of when we have astronomically evidence of there being an eclipse. So when we have these prophets talking about it, especially these the second these like end of the first temple era prophets talking about the darkening, it very much could be they may have actually experienced it. It's something that they know what this is like, and keep in mind, as opposed to nowadays when we're already planning for 2044 as a total eclipse of the sun, this just happened. So you can imagine the awe and the dread, as the Yom Gadol v'Norah, as the prophet mentions, of how this could be something to create this sense of foreboding or of negativity. And so we see that in our prophets. And it's the Maharal of Prague, when talking about this idea of darkness and light, feels that very much so. This is connected, as the prophets seem to be indicating, with our behavior. There should always be light, right? The natural order should always facilitate the fact that it should always continue. And these changes in the natural order, especially those that extinguish the light, are based on behavior when things aren't going well. And we'll see in a moment that he's basing himself on a Talmudic discussion about what happens when the sun doesn't shine. In fact, the Hebrew word, anyone know the Hebrew word for eclipse? Extra credit. Anybody know? It's called likui. It is there is a likui. There is the from the word malchus. It's an affliction. It's negative. There's a punishment involved to some extent when it comes to this. And so there's a lot of dread and foreboding connected. We see it, in the words of the prophets themselves, and we see it in other faith traditions as well. Source number 6. Also an article from USA Today about 10 days ago that talks about Islam and eclipses. 14 centuries ago, source number 6, as Islam's Muhammadan supporters grieved his deathly ill son, the prophet watched the toddler breathe his last as the skies darkened above them. The beginning, it is believed, of a total eclipse. As the story goes, speculation spread about Muhammad's followers that even the sun and the moon were grieving his loss. In response, he summoned them to prayer and dispelled that notion, but added that such events as signs of God's power should nonetheless inspire them to pray. Omi Safi, a professor of Islamic studies at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, said tradition holds that both solar and lunar eclipses are divine matters unfolding in nature. While honoring the prophet's steadfast refusal to use the fortuitous occasion of a solar eclipse as the passing of his son as a way of bolstering his own standing. While Islam's eclipse prayer is not a mandatory one, many still take time to recite it. During last fall's annular eclipse, Muslim Americans around the U.S. gathered in places such as the Muslim Community Center and to pray. So you have this idea that there's a sense of foreboding, but we have to pray through it. There's a number of similarities. There's foreboding, but we pray through it, and we're going to see that there definitely is that type of reaction in Jewish traditional sources as well. As complicated as Islam is as a religion in Islamism and radical Islam and Muslims and everything that goes on in the world, especially in the Middle East and Israel and Gaza, is the spiritual tradition of Islam does have a lot of overlapping similarities with Judaism. We came first. So, for example, just last week, there was an event at Citibank. It seems that there's this push in a number of large companies, that are trying to, that are part of what, is probably very complicated and complex and is much maligned these days, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI elements, within the academic and corporate worlds. But there is a lot of diversity, and some places want to try and create some level of inclusion. So there are a lot of affinity groups in these companies, and so there are also religious affinity groups in these companies. So Citibank in particular was one I was acquainted with. I was contacted by a member of the congregation who works there about being a rabbi in one of these events. They had a sukkah this past Sukkot. The Jewish affinity group, they're going to have a kind of a model Seder in advance of Pesach. But the Muslim affinity group was having an iftar in connection with Ramadan. And to make this not just something for the Muslims, but maybe of broader interest to other faiths or other employees, there was an interfaith panel on fasting. What does fasting mean in religion? So there was sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it was a rabbi, a priest, and an imam who were talking about the various, how fasting is demonstrated and what are the meaning behind the fast days, in the different traditions. I spoke that there's fasting that's abstaining, usually connected to sad events, and there's also fasting which is transcending, like Yom Kippur. It was a very interesting conversation. There was a lot of intersecting, in terms of religious themes, especially between Judaism and Islam, which is very much an action-based religion. There's a lot more ritual than there is in Christianity. But some of the terms that they use are very similar. So, for example, the Arabic word for fasting is som. Som is what we call fasting in Judaism. Charity in Arabic is tzedakah. So there's a lot of recurring or commonalities in terms of the themes, and because we started it and they took it from us, as is the case. But this spiritual tradition, the foreboding, right, on the one hand, is very natural. you expect it to be light, and then it becomes dark, you're going to get a little depressed. We know what happens when they shorten the days, when daylight savings times ends. But this idea of there being kind of a religious impact, we see it in the prophets, we see it in Islam. And then the idea for introspection and how to make sense of this as a natural phenomenon. What's kind of what's the message, as well as the reaction from a Jewish perspective, is what we're going to look at now. The Talmud deals with this idea of an eclipse, or in a certain natural phenomena in a piece in Sukkah 29a, source number 7. We'll look at a number of the selections from it, where it tries to understand what's the point or what's the reason for these types of natural phenomenon or atmospheric phenomenon with sun and moon and stars, as well as trying to figure out where this fits in. We'll ask the question, should there be a bracha? Is there a bracha recited? We say bracha for lightning and thunder and the ocean and things of that sort. So what about something as fantastic as an eclipse? So first, let's look at some of the sections from the Talmud. Source number 7. The sages taught, when the sun is eclipsed, it is a bad omen for the entire world. To what does this matter? Comparable to a king of flesh and blood who prepared a feast for his servants and placed the lantern before them to illuminate the hall. He became angry, said to the servant, take the lantern and seat him in darkness. All right, the idea, we're sitting in a normal place, the lights are on, then the lights go out. That's not a good thing. That's not a good sign. That's not a good thing. So you have kind of an initial negativity. Next, it is taught that Rabbi Meir says, when the heavenly lights, the sun and the moon, are eclipsed, it is a bad omen for the enemies of the Jewish people. Now, when it says Sonehem Shel Yisrael, it's actually a euphemism for the Jewish people because they are experiencing their beatings. The Talmud sometimes reverses it. So, for example, when they talk about it, they call it Lashon Sagi Nahor. That you call someone who is blind someone who is who is steeped in brightness. Here it's talking about that when the sun and moon are eclipsed, it's a bad omen for the enemies of the Jewish people. No, it's a bad omen for the Jewish people. Based on past experience, they assume that any calamity that afflicts the world is directed at them, right? This kind of, woe is me mentality, which, comes from being an oppressed people. It's like, this expectation sometimes we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. The Gemara suggests a parable. This is similar to a teacher who comes to the school with a strap in his hand. Who worries? The child who's accustomed to getting beaten each and every day is the one who worries. So now what? The lights have gone out. The sun has been eclipsed. There's darkness where there should be light. The Jew starts to worry. This is how the rabbis understand it. Further, the sages taught, when the sun is eclipsed, it is a bad omen for the other nations. When the moon is eclipsed, it's a bad omen for the enemies of the Jewish people, the actual enemies of the Jewish people. This is due to the fact that the Jewish people calculate their calendar primarily based on the moon, and the other nations calculate based on the sun, right? So since really this is all impacting the sun, we, the Jews, are safe, and the rest of the world is in danger. This is, a light in the darkness of the more difficult earlier passages. Then the sages taught that on account of 4 matters, the sun is eclipsed. On account of a president of the court who dies and is not eulogized properly. Eclipse is a type of a eulogy by heaven. So therefore it's a midah keneged midah. On account of a betrothed young woman who screamed in the city as she was being raped and there was no one to rescue her. Right, a very clear offense that had no response. On account of homosexuality, on account of 2 brothers whose blood was spilled as one. These are, in the Jewish tradition, these are crimes against the natural order. And so therefore the natural order responds to these actions, is the way the sages put it. When Rashi addresses these bishvil daled dvarim, lo shamati tamad davar. He says there's really no, I don't have a good explanation. You can try and have at it. You can try and understand it, but there's nothing prescriptive here per se. This is the rabbis describing, in their opinion, how to understand the change to the natural order, maybe being a result of the natural order being violated morally, ethically, sexually, etc. But Rashi says, Lo shamati tam b'davar, can't give you a good answer. the common denominator from 3 of these 4 selections from Sukkah 29 is that it's bad, it's negative. Right? That's seemingly the attitude of the Jew, like the example was. Okay, someone's coming in with a strap. We're the ones who normally get beaten. That's what we should be worried about here, except for the one that says it's an impact on the world. Either way, there's negativity abounds, right? It's either going to be bad for the Jews or bad for everybody else, and this is something that we need to be wary of. Any questions, comments, reactions from the Talmud, from the rabbis, dealing with these, natural phenomena of the constellations? Some of them have more that may be more associated or cause us to be introspective of what we're doing wrong. Some of them may be about certain ills that society must fix. The rabbis are generally seeing this as there's something awry that requires our attention, and as Rashi says, there's no direct correlation or causality per se what the message is for those of us who are not involved, right? If certainly if we're not included in any of the 4 transgressions that are mentioned, what's our role in this? We're a little bit at a loss, but these are natural phenomena that are causing us to take heed. So can anyone think of another natural phenomenon that causes us to take heed? It's one that's mentioned in the Torah itself. Which natural phenomenon is meant to...
Heshet, rainbow.
Very good. The rainbow at the end of the flood, that becomes the sign that God won't destroy the world again. And the rainbow then takes on a kind of a loaded place within the natural phenomenon upon which we recite a blessing, right? Like we mentioned before, you say blessing when you see lightning and hear thunder, see the ocean, right? Oseh Maaseh Bereshit recognizes God as the one who who creates the glories of nature. Rainbow has a unique blessing. It's the longer one. It's sometimes the harder one to remember. Anyone who can think back to their bracha bees.
Zocher habrit.
So Zocher habrit, that's the first part. What's the rest of it? Zocher habrit v'ne'eman bivrito v'kayam b'mamaro. Remembers it can be relied upon to fulfill and upholds his word. And the question that is asked is the rainbow a good sign or a bad sign? On the one hand, well, God's not going to destroy the world. But on the other hand, the fact that there is a rainbow means maybe God was thinking about destroying the world. So maybe the appearance of the rainbow is to indicate very bad behavior going on, that there's what we would call in Talmudic language a hava amina. God's thinking to destroy the world. And that's not a good thing, right? So a blessing on a rainbow, does that indicate just the reality of the natural phenomenon, or is it, or is there some sort of religious message as well? If it's just on the phenomenon, then okay, you see it, you say it, done. If we're supposed to dig a little bit more deeply into this, that God might be destroying the world, well, maybe, if this is negative, this is just a bracha on bad news, on we should be changing, how does that work? And this leads to a machloket as to whether or not, if you see a rainbow, should you tell someone? If you see something, do you say something? In the Mishnah Berurah source number 9, right, this is the Chafetz Chaim, one who sees a rainbow says it isn't appropriate to tell one's friend that there's a rainbow because of spreading bad rumors that the world deserves to be destroyed, but for God's mercy. So the Mishnah Berurah takes this as a kind of a negative message that's being delivered by the rainbow, and therefore you see it, say the bracha, but don't tell other people about it. And this leads to discussion. Well, what about an eclipse? The eclipse is a natural phenomenon. It's the glory of creation, and that is deserving of attention. We'll have to see if it's deserving of a blessing, but it's deserving of attention. But what about the fact that the Talmud looks at this for the most part very negatively, that something bad's about to happen, right? And at least 75% of what we saw, it's bad for us, right? Maybe the silver lining is that it's not bad for us, but it's still bad because it's bad for everybody else. So do you tell people about an eclipse? Well, hopefully you're allowed to, because otherwise I'm in big trouble, because that's what I've been talking about. And in fact, Rabbi Avigdor Nebenzahl, rabbi of the old city of Jerusalem, says that, look, when the Jewish people perform the will of God, they have nothing to fear from these events, right? We just do our part. And also keeping in mind that, remember, what kind of sign can there be if these things are scheduled, right? We're saying here already that we know when the next one's going to take place. So maybe the commentary function of these of the eclipse isn't really exactly what Chazal thought it was, right? You have to also kind of keep in mind what did the prophets and the sages think was happening with an eclipse? What do we know is happening in an eclipse? Right, it's when the moon moves between the Earth and the sun. But how did how did people 2,500 years ago, or even 2,000 years ago, understand the way the universe operates? It's not clear that they would have even envisioned the eclipse working the same way. There was a suggestion by one of the 17th century rabbis, Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, that the way it seems to be describing, what's happening. And remember, when especially that when an eclipse takes place, as we said, this is the order of things. We know this is going to happen. What are you worried about? This is the natural order of things. So what kind of unpredictable outcome are we concerned with that we have to worry about our behavior? So he says it's sunspots, solar flares, right? Something that's out of the ordinary, right? There's something can change drastically. That's what we're worried about. So it's a little bit unclear, like, well, why is there some type of a causal relationship understood if this is a scientific phenomenon? So, Rabbi Nebenzahl is saying, do we got to do? You do you, God does God. If you think you're misbehaving, well, then fix your behavior. But otherwise, you shouldn't be so worried. You can tell people about the eclipse. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. There does seem to be one indication. One of the Hasidic rabbis suggested not to get married if there's a solar eclipse if there's an eclipse taking place. The idea that in general you want to get married when there's more light. It's part of his suggestion to get married in the first half of the month, not the second half of the month, when the light of the moon is growing as opposed to shrinking. In any event, so Rabbi Nebenzahl is, just move forward. Mishnah Berurah elsewhere deals with the fact that, quotes an opinion, Shal Vana Lokeh Yesh Lihisanos. He talks about when there's a lunar eclipse, you should fast. Doesn't talk about a solar eclipse, but so on the one hand, you have those who are more concerned with the religious ramifications or the repercussions of religious behavior as indicated by these phenomena, and those who are less so. But it's clear from the Talmud was concerned. If you see something like this, there should be a religious reaction. So, but what is that religious reaction, right? Rabbi Nebenzahl says, do the right thing always. Some say fast, or don't you look at this day negatively. So Rabbi Nachum Mendel Schneerson dealt with this in a 1957 letter. Source number 12, there's a well-established principle that it's forbidden to institute a blessing that is not mentioned in the Talmud, and some say that the reason that no blessing was instituted because the eclipse is a bad omen. Right? So he's addressing the fact that we have no bracha on an eclipse. Right, the rabbis knew about it, but did not include this in the phenomenon, the astronomical or atmospheric phenomenon for which we do have blessings, like lightning. To the contrary, it's important to pray for the omen to be annulled and to cry out rather than say blessing. So Rabbi Schneerson sees there's a moment of introspection and reflection, and maybe correction that comes from this, but it's not a moment for saying a bracha. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, talks about the idea also of blessings. Our rabbis instituted blessings over acts of creation, powerful natural events like lightning and thunder and so on. However, they did not do so for a lunar or solar eclipse. And if only today we could institute a blessing when we are aware that an eclipse is indeed an incredible natural event, but we cannot. For a person is forbidden to make up a blessing. So he's saying, look, this should be on the list. But the rabbis didn't have did not appreciate this that way to institute a blessing, so we're stuck. But it says if a person wants to say some form of blessing, he should recite the verses, and David blessed the Lord. Right? You should invoke. This is what we say in the morning service. Vayvarech David et Hashem vayomer David Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So it has Baruch atah Hashem in it, but you're quoting a pasuk, so that's how you can invoke it. But he says you can't say Oseh Maaseh Bereshit for something like this. There is was a rabbi of in Bnei Brak. His name was Rabbi Vosner, and it is related that he was visiting Switzerland and encountered a waterfall, which was very beautiful, and he said the bracha of Oseh Maaseh Bereshit on it, even though it wasn't like Niagara Falls. And it seemed to me that he was reacting to the wonder of seeing nature, even though it didn't necessarily fit the criteria that the rabbis had instituted for saying that bracha. And so they asked him, well, what about an eclipse? Rabbi, you seem to be saying this as a response to wondrous nature. What about an eclipse? And he said, Sarach Iyun. It could be investigated. He didn't want to give an answer on it, but it does seem that there are those who have a little bit more loosened up than either Rabbi Schneerson or Rabbi Halevi with regards to being able to say a bracha in reaction to the grandeur of nature, even if it doesn't fit the initial criteria as indicated by the Talmud and quoted in Shulchan Aruch in the Code of Jewish Law. Another solution might be, and we talked about this with another blessing, that it has to do with another blessing. I wrote a piece after the rally in Washington when there were so many people. Do you make a bracha on such a gathering? And the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch say that when there are 600,000 Jews in one place, you say a bracha. It says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam chacham harazim, God the knower of secrets, because God is the only one who knows the individuality of each of the 600,000 people there. And so there was actually a rally some 10 years ago in the ultra-Orthodox community. I believe it was a protest of some sort that brought out a lot of people, and it may have brought out 600,000 people. Remember, these estimates of how many people there are calculated based on the number of people identified in one certain amount, and it's extrapolated. So organizers have one count, police have another count. But so the question emerged in advance of this rally, like, should we say the bracha? Should we not say the bracha? So usually when you're not sure about a bracha, we have a principle that's safek brachot lahakel. When you're not sure about a bracha, best to do without, right? Not to say the bracha. Don't because we take brachot very seriously. We don't want to invoke God's name unless we really mean it. So some said, take that path out. Others said, this is a wonderful event, and if we think there's 600,000, just say the bracha. A third approach was said, look, we don't know how many people are there. If you're witnessing the event, read the line in Shulchan Aruch, which says, Haroeh shishim ribo Yehudim b'makom echad yomer habracha baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. It says, say the bracha. In which case, you're not invoking God's name to say a bracha, you're just reading the law. So, maybe you could, have something similar here to respond that you, seeing the wonders of nature, invoke quote the blessing, even including God's name. In general, our hesitance to say God's name is, we don't want to say it in vain. But, if I want people to know what the exact bracha is, and they're not as familiar with how blessings work, I can't say them say Baruch atah Hashem. Hashem has to be replaced with God's name. So basically, I can say the blessing so that you know what the blessing is, and I can be saying that blessing. I can be teaching that lesson during the eclipse of the sun, and then we cover our bases. Similar to the suggestion made by if you're not sure if it's 600,000 people or if you should say the bracha, what's the area, over how much space. It was a whole separate conversation we had then. So there is this idea of trying to seek a religious response to the solar eclipse, and even if we have Chazal, the sages in the Talmud, seeing things negatively, but we can also we move a little bit beyond it. We have Rabbi Nevenzahl recommending that we go on in our business, we do what we're supposed to do, and not worry about the messages being sent through nature, especially something that is scheduled, that is part of nature. We can be somewhat introspective or pensive, to some extent, based on the Talmud, as Rabbi Schneerson has suggested. We can't fully necessarily embrace this with a bracha, like both Rabbi Schneerson and Rabbi Halevi say, but maybe we should be excited by it. And source number 14, Rabbi Yitzchak Adlerstein, has an article in Cross Currents from 2017. That was the last solar eclipse. And it tells a story, source number 14. Thanks to a prominent U.S. rabbi who wishes to stay anonymous, Cross Currents is pleased to offer a translation of the Shmuel Pliskin article on the Chafetz Chaim's reaction to a solar eclipse that he knew was going to be visible in his community. It's a fascinating read, with the tzidkus of the Chafetz Chaim, thanks to Josh Flug of Boca Raton, whose research led to the conclusion that this was describing an event on June 29th, 1927. Anyone here remember that one? I don't think so. So you have, but you have here an article was written about describing the Chafetz Chaim witnessing a solar eclipse. So what is it? So this is from that article, and the Chafetz Chaim taps again with his right hand on the table, with an expression of victory and smiling. He adds, "They should come to see. It's a mitzvah to see the sun eclipse, to actually see that creation was actually formed by the Creator." And he taps lightly again with his right hand, a quiet smile. They had already prepared for the Chafetz Chaim a special triply thick darkened pair of glasses, which properly fit the good and trustworthy eyes of the holy and vaunted elder. The righteous one does this, looking at the eclipse with holy trepidation, exactly as he would silently gaze at his Chanukiah, from which he does not remove his eyes so long as there are sparkling remnants of oil. And behold, the darkness has eclipsed the entire sphere, as if a large well of ink has spilled and filled the space. A strange darkness, not that of the twilight, not even like the thick darkness of night. Behold, a black curtain has been stretched on the face of the sun. There remains not even one red streak. And behold the wonder. Behold, behold, once again, born is the new sun, like in the 6 days of creation, as the eclipse passes. So you have, this is, a record. We don't have, halachic decisions of the Chafetz Chaim per se in this situation. We do, have his mentioning the fact that, for a lunar eclipse, maybe we should be fasting. But here we have Maaseh Shahaya, as recorded by Shmuel Pliskin, that Chafetz Chaim was pretty impressed. And there's you can look at the original, you can look at the article for the full translation. It describes other people, one of the other rabbis there, the people running, around, and the courtyard being full of people left the Beit Midrash. And, there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about this, because sometimes it's when nature is not what we expect that we can better appreciate the glory of nature. And this is something that Rabbi Benjamin Blech alludes to and talks about in an article that he wrote also in 2017, source number 15. An eclipse may be an omen, but is not a verdict or a final judgment. It's a moment in time which serves as a reminder of God's awesome power and goodness. Without the benefit of the sun, its light, its warmth, its power, its energy, and its role in the solar system, we cannot survive for a moment. That is why, with infinite wisdom and at preordained times on the calendar, God removes from us its rays for the briefest of time, so that we might reflect on the miracle of its otherwise constant presence, which we so readily take for granted. A sign asks us to take note. It has a message. It's not hard to believe that the creator of the universe built signposts predicated on natural law as ongoing reminders for mankind. The awesome message of an eclipse and its meaning for us has a remarkable parallel to a universal Jewish custom. It is extremely important, NASA and other experts tell us, that we cover our eyes and not look directly at the sun when it happens. Failure to heed this counsel could lead to blindness. I cannot help but think of the very same admonition to cover our eyes when we recite the Shema. At the moment when we contemplate God's uniqueness and greatness, we indicate that his splendor is beyond the capacity of our vision. To think we truly see his essence with the limited perspective of our eyes is to be blind to the reality of his infinite magnificence. The eclipse reminds us of a universe so much vaster than our ability to fully comprehend. Don't fear it, rather welcome it as a sign, as the psalmist King David reminded us. The heavens declare the glory of God, the sky above proclaims his handiwork. The idea, shifting into a 21st century understanding that there's a sign, but it's something, a phenomenon that should be embraced, which should amplify our appreciation, so much so to recognize that we appreciate nature. We need the sun, especially when we don't have it, and recognize that our vision is limited. We can't look directly at this natural phenomenon, just like we can't fully appreciate what God does in the universe. So this total eclipse of the sun next week will, for those who get to see it more closely, it will be a wonder. I'm not sure there's a bracha to be recited upon it, but there's certainly a message, a religious message to all of us about the glories of God's creation. And our role to do the best that we can, certainly to appreciate that and to live lives that hopefully are full enough that any of the negative consequences which might be connected pass us by, and that we return to the light as much as possible.